So thank you so much. I'm very pleased to welcome Eva Salinas from CBC Hamilton.
Panelists. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. To those who are watching online via CBC Hamilton, at the branches, as Nancy said, here in person. Really appreciate your time, and we hope to get into a fruitful discussion today. I'll introduce the panelists in just a moment. My name is Eva Salinas. I am the executive producer of CBC Hamilton. We are a small team here in the city, and like many of you, I'm assuming those tuning in are looking forward to October 24th, and we'll get into all the different issues that matter to you. That's why we're here today, to talk about the issues that matter to you, to your communities, what you think might be needed in this last week, in this last push before October 24th. I'd first like to acknowledge we are gathering on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations. These are lands that are protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, which was an agreement by the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people to share and care for this land and the resources in the area and around the Great Lakes. This land is home to many Indigenous people, and as a settler, I recognize that I have a responsibility to continually learn about the history and current context, including established Indigenous laws that govern this land, and that help inform my understanding and my role as a resident and as a neighbor. We're going to be talking about governing this land and the many ways that we do that and we engage as citizens. Municipal politics are one of the many ways we can engage as residents. We're taking a look at that today. And we're now just, as I mentioned, 1 week away from the election, just over 1 week. In Hamilton, 6 councillors and the current mayor are not running for re-election. So we know by that fact alone, we're going to see change no matter what. I'd like to introduce our 5 panelists who will help discuss the issues that matter to them. We're going to have a discussion. We'll be opening it up to questions here in person, online as well. So if you're tuning in and want to send in a question via social media, we encourage you to do that. A question, a comment as well. We've gathered some of those kinds of responses already before, and I'll be sharing some of those shortly. So I'll just start right on the end here. I'd like to introduce Gavin Stephens. Gavin is a stand-up comedian and has been featured in Montreal and Toronto's Just for Laughs festivals, as well as the Cape Town Comedy Fest and many others, Austin's South by Southwest as well. He is also co-host of the Uncolonized podcast. Welcome, Gavin.
Thank you.
Cheyenne Hussein is a grade 12 student at Orchard Park Secondary School in Stony Creek, a teen ambassador graduate from Canada Learning Code, and one of the organizers of his school's first Muslim Student Association. Welcome, Cheyenne.
Thank you.
Anabelle Ragsag is co-founder of Filipinas of HamOnt and the current Stephen Lewis Social Policy PhD Fellow at McMaster University's School of Social Work. Welcome, Anabelle.
Thank you.
Sonia Hill is Mohawk, Lebanese, and mixed European with family ties to 6 nations. They're also the director of the Indigenous Sustenance Reclamation Network. Welcome, Sonia. And last but not least, Mohamed Bassat is a Filipino, Lebanese, and Palestinian first-generation Canadian. He's also a staff lawyer practicing within housing and human rights at the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic and the founder of the running crew Air Up There. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you can each give me a little bit more about your background in terms of why you're interested in politics and what this election means to you. I'm going to start with you down at the end, Gavin.
I guess I've always kind of been next to politics, and then I started doing my podcast, I would say 7 or 8 years ago, and then kind of figured out on where on the political spectrum I landed, and yeah, that's how I got into being more interested in politics, and yeah.
And as someone who has lived in Hamilton some time,
yeah.
How does this election matter to you?
I think seeing during the pandemic where I live and seeing people in tent, living outside in tents, I think that's kind of a major issue, especially during the federal election when we didn't really talk about those people. We talked about getting people into, or new owners of houses, as opposed to people who just need to have shelter in general. So that's kind of what this election means for me, yeah.
Thank you. Cheyenne.
Yeah, so although I have worked for Elections Ontario twice now, I really started getting into politics actually when I started my first Muslim Student Association. I helped found that, and after getting elected as one of the presidents by the executives, it made me realize how important, like feedback from everyone is. And when I got like constructive criticism back from everyone, I felt like I could become such a better leader. And that's when I started tying that into our own area, right? And so giving my feedback to the leaders of this area where we live in, that's when I started realizing that, maybe this is important, our voice matters. So that's when I started realizing my passion for politics. It started growing, and now I hope to inspire other young students as well to vote.
Thank you so much. And I know you've been chatting with some of your fellow high school, friends and peers, and so I'd love to hear more of just what you've heard in terms of what matters to them, or whether they feel connected to municipal politics. Thank you.
Totally. It's not about what I am hearing, though. Actually, it's what about I'm not hearing. I'm not hearing a lot of students actually interested in politics. Usually, when I talk to them, they're saying, "Oh, I'm disinterested. I'm not very interested about who's running. I'll let the older people, settle that." But as we grow up, as us young generation, as we grow up to become the older, mature people, now we have that right to vote, and now it's up to us to give back that feedback. So I'm really hearing that not a lot of people are interested. And I hope that a lot of people start, gaining on this very important thing, this voting, that we can use our voices to help project who can be the better leader for our area.
Thank you. Anabelle.
Yeah, hi everyone. I come to this discussion from several vantage points. Eva already mentioned that I'm a co-founder of the Filipinas of HamOnt. I also work with a group of women and non-binary folks in Hamilton under the name of the Hamilton Asian Alliance. I also volunteer in a campaign, and I have linkages with migrant organizations. But most importantly, I'm a mother of a young child sitting here in front of it as one of the audience, and an auntie to my child's friends. And I think my main interest to politics is I want my kid and her friends and their friends to live in a sustainable and livable city. So I think election matters because of this. Like, it's very personal to me. And a lot of us, sometimes I hear I'm not into politics, but even if we're not into politics, politics is into us. So.
Sonia.
Sego, hi. Thank you. Yeah, I think that for me, like, my involvement in politics has kind of always been there since I was, really young, trying to get into those conversations with like my dad and my uncles and stuff, and honestly was kind of like discouraged a little bit growing up from being involved in politics, but kind of found myself in my early 20s doing a lot of like grassroots organizing with community in Hamilton. Being born and raised here, it's really important to me, like the future of the city and our current realities. I think this is a really interesting time where we can really change the city. There's a lot of positions that are going to be changed out this time around, and I think it's important to pay attention to. I think some of the issues that I'm really interested in are redistributing the police budget. I think it's like ridiculously large, and that money can go to support community services that actually uplift our city and our people. So yeah, really interested in housing, the lack of affordable housing, and yeah, talking a bit about redistributing the police budget. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
So I think for politics, I think I've always had an interest in it. I think I wasn't born in Canada, but I was born in Saudi Arabia, and so I think I've witnessed firsthand what it feels like to be under the thumb of state-sponsored violence, seeing what my parents have felt being under the thumb of state-sponsored violence, and then coming into Canada and seeing what that's like here for Indigenous folks, and then now in our city, seeing what that's like for people who live in encampments. And so I think for me, it's always been a part of my life, whether I like it or not. It pulls me back, even when I feel apathetic or disengaged. And in terms of, our city, the stakes are very high for a lot of people. It's life or death for many people. And so that holds really dear to me when I think about what the outcome might be when I think about these elections.
Well, and there's a lot of decisions to be made. We've spoken to a few people based on the fact that in 2018, we know that voter turnout was 38%. A lot of people still aren't voting. And so thinking about what the opportunity of this election, and we will get into ways that we participate in the community politics and the different definitions of that, but what do you think specifically the opportunity is for this election for folks thinking about whether they should vote, how they make those decisions, and what they should be thinking of? Mo, will you continue a little bit more on what there drew you when you're thinking about the election opportunities here?
Yeah, so like when I think about the election, I think for a lot of times the political machine works in a way to make people feel apathetic, not wanting to be a part of it, feeling that they can't have influence over the outcomes. And I think, especially with COVID, I think a lot of people that don't necessarily feel the strong arm of government suddenly started to feel that. And while there was a 38% turnout, very low back in 2018, I think we're going to see a big change in that now. I think people in the last 4 years have transformed, and I think we're starting to see a radical transformation from a lot of people that hopefully will be, love fully realized. That's what I really think about. So I think that's what's going to pull that out and bring people to the table. I think a lot of people have a say and want to have a say, and I think the election is an opportunity for them to be able to express that.
Cheyenne, you, I'm not outing your age, you've shared it with CBC audience in a column already. You just turned 18 in the spring. Yeah. You reflected in that column on just your own thoughts and how connected you felt to politics. So for instance, you knew you felt connected enough to volunteer at Elections Ontario, but you still didn't vote in the provincial election. Are you voting now? What's changed your mind? And what are you hearing from some of your friends?
To start off, when I worked with Elections Ontario, I did feel the need to go and help the community and give back. And as I was working there, I was eligible to vote in the past election, but I didn't because I just felt like it wasn't really that important to myself. Now, what has changed is now after building my own community, after building my own club, being president of it, and just reflecting back on everything that I've done, I realized that becoming a leader, there's so much more than just yourself. You have a whole community to look after. People that chose you to become a leader, now it's your job to help those people because they're the ones that chose you in the first place. So now what I'm thinking is now when I go, this will be my first election that I'll be voting at. I've been eligible to vote before, but now I feel the need to vote. And so for me, this is really important. This is a really big thing for me. It's the very first time I'll be able to vote, and then I'll be able to reflect on that in the coming years. And as well, I also encourage my fellow peers that are also eligible to vote in the coming years, maybe not in this election, but in the next election, wherever that will take place. I will encourage all my friends and all my peers and even other people that I just hang around with. And I hope that we can get a better, younger audience to vote.
Thank you. Gavin, you touched on some issues that matter to you right in your neighborhood that you might see when you walk out your door. Yeah. Is that why you think is there an opportunity there because of what people can see? They can see the change when they walk out the door potentially. Is that the opportunity you see?
I hope so. I think people, and I don't mean this as an insult, tend to be more politically illiterate when it comes to local elections. I think we tend to be focused on what I see in my neighborhood is a lot of hate for Justin Trudeau. So it's a lot of federal, that's where their politics are mentally. But I think local elections are more important. So I hope, although Hamilton is one of those places where people do tend to, they live within a lot of councillors, around a lot of councillors and people like that. So I think hopefully more people will be locally minded, but I feel like it's going to be a lower turnout. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but that's how I feel. Yeah.
I'm wondering, Anabelle, I don't know if you have thoughts on this. Is the opportunity here in the discussions that are happening in the campaign, or is it just in the results? I mean, I know those are tied, but do you differentiate between the opportunity and how we're discussing about the city we want to see as, you know, we put questions to candidates, we hear concerns from communities, there's op-eds, there's reporting, you know, how do you see the difference there in the conversations and then also the opportunity of what the results actually will be?
I think an argument can be made that when we generate conversations about what's happening, we are inviting more people to the table and seeing the excitement of what's happening here. Like for me, for example, and I think a lot of people, there's a sense of hope when we see women, non-binary folks, BIPOC people who have stepped forward in these elections, in these municipal elections. I see a sense of collaboration and generosity when organizations thoughtfully and intentionally come up with a list of endorsements. So I think this shows that the conversations that we are having can generally invite excitement and participation. And I think municipal elections is, I compare it to like a virtual game, like a virtual reality game. It is in the municipal elections where we can have a chance of putting together, of trying to push for what change do we want in this city. Of course, like voting for the federal and the provincial elections will be helpful, but here is where we live. Here is where we have a greater chance of moving the pieces together. What is it that we want here? And it's not just a dream. I'm not a part of the Narinder Nan campaign, but her success is an example of how it can be, of how it might be possible to have policies implemented, policies that are made and implemented for the 99%. So it's not something that we can just brush aside and say, you know, nothing will change, whoever is there. There is change. We just have to, and I'm hopeful and happy for the people who are here with us today, because it means that this conversation is something that is important in these elections.
Thank you. Sonia, could you tell us a bit of just your intersections with this election? Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of interesting for me as somebody who does not vote in municipal, provincial, or federal elections. I am Ganegahaga, I'm a Mohawk person. So for me, it's almost as if I see it like, as an Indigenous person, voting would be like conceding to like the settler state and kind of admitting in a way that like they have true power over us. And I don't believe that's true. Our Indigenous nations are sovereign nations. So we have our own laws, our own governance structures, and it's our responsibility to follow those. And so I see this as like, we have different responsibilities as Ungwehune people, as Indigenous people, and as non-Indigenous people in this election. So for me, I feel like my role is more so in like those kinds of conversation pieces like that Anabelle was speaking about, encouraging folks who it is their responsibility to vote to do so, to like choose leaders who will honor that role in a responsible way. But I don't feel like it's like my responsibility to vote in this election. So I'm here for these conversations, and I think that a lot of the times the shifts that happen within people's minds, but also the way that they then go and walk those politics out into the world after these conversations, that for me is like where I feel my impact is to be made. So definitely different roles, I think, for myself as an Indigenous person with regards to this election, and really hoping that folks do choose leaders that are responsible and do honor the power that's being put on them and given to them in a good way. Yeah.
Thank you. We've flipped the script a little bit with this panel because there are many panels where candidates are up on stage and the community does get to ask questions, and That's a great way to get informed and interact with your candidates and making decisions. But we've put also community members here on stage today, and I know candidates, many of them are going door to door, they're interacting with folks, and so they're trying to get a sense of what matters. But you all, each in your many different ways in communities, and we all have so many different identities, are intersecting and interacting with community members. What are you hearing in your own neighborhoods as the top issues this campaign? Sonia, actually, do you want to continue on that?
Yeah, sure, why not? I feel like in like my circles and networks and the communities I live in and work with, it's a lot of stuff about affordable housing. Like the lack of affordable housing in the city is just, it's a little ridiculous. I myself have been pushed out of 5 different apartments in the last 5 years. I've moved like 1 to 2 times every year for the last 5 years, and like nobody should have to do that. The one situation was actually I lost my job because of COVID, and I had to leave my apartment because I couldn't afford it anymore. So like these things that we're discussing are very real, even to us up here. So that to me is something that I hear from other folks as well. People having to develop creative ways of figuring out housing for themselves. Shouldn't be this hard to have an affordable apartment. Yeah, so it's definitely something I'm really thinking about deeply. Also, all of our unsheltered neighbors as well. Yeah, just thinking about what budgets we have and how those are being used. I gave the example of the police budget. It's huge. How can we utilize that more responsibly, that money? Maybe redistributing some of those funds to supports that enable our communities to flourish a little more. Yeah, those are some of the things I'm thinking of.
Thank you. Cheyenne, you mentioned speaking to your peers. What kinds of issues, aside from their connection to elections, what kinds of issues matter to them and you?
Some of the issues that matter to them, and also me as well, is just community engagement for young students like myself. You know, going out, having proper recreation services, and also just to know, like when I go to my friends, when I talk to people in my school, I typically find 2 types of people. You have the people that are really, really interested in politics and are advocating for one certain politician. Then you have the people that are really disinterested and have nothing to do with politics. I want to hear from them. You know, I just want everyone to be able to be somewhat mildly interested in politics. You know, a lot of issues is that it won't matter to them, like I previously stated, that we're young, you know, we're kids. It won't matter to us at all as we grow up, but we will eventually have to, we will have to make a choice. So instead of being an advocate for just a certain politician, I want to hear people just finding out their true election choices. So like for instance, I may not be advocating for a certain politician, but I want to be able to inspire other young students just to be somewhat mildly interested in politics. And some of the issues that they come up with is that, oh, I don't know who to vote for, or it doesn't really matter to me. I live comfortably. None of their choices matter to me. It'll probably matter to my parents. But as we grow on, as we get houses, as we get a job and everything, those choices will slowly matter to us. And I feel like not enough students are actually taking that advantage of online research and going up, even taking a simple Google search. Not a lot of students go up and just see what each candidate is offering. And I think that is an issue that I also have dealt with as well. I don't know where to start. Simple Google search is where I started. And I think everyone else can do the same thing. And that's some of the issues that I think that are happening within my neighborhood or my young school society.
Thank you. Anabelle, what are you hearing? I know you've spoken to people in the context of COVID recovery. What are some of the issues that you're hearing from within your community?
Yeah, the Filipinas of HamOnt has been approached a couple of times to ask help for directions on where, this is very sad, but where to get help in funeral services. What I didn't realize before is that a lot of Filipinos who have moved here in the 60s, as in the healthcare sector, and in the 80s, who worked as lived-in caregivers, they're now in their older adult age, and a lot of them may not have their families with them. And so at the height of COVID, a lot of them passed away without close family. It breaks my heart that this happens in a country like Canada. And Jessica and I at the Filipinas of HamOnt wrote a grant before to help Pandemic Response Fund for senior adults in the Filipino community. And we also heard the same issues, that it seems we have been forgotten. Like a lot of help were given for those who are employed, which is rightly so, right? Employed who lost their job during the pandemic, students, but how about the older adults? As a parent, I also hear often about road safety. Like my child even walks sometimes, a couple of times a week from school, and I worry about that when she walks with friends. Like I feel, because I'm not there, I'm in class at McMaster, I worry that what if, knock on wood, something happens, and because we see this often in the news, not just in the news, but these are happening, so road safety. I also, because I have linkages with Asian migrant communities, I also hear a lot from the Butterfly Network, led by this fantastic individual, Elaine Lam, who is also a student at McMaster University in the social work faculty. And they have been organizing to fight bylaws that discriminate, harm, and over-police sex workers. I think these are issues that we should also, that our political leaders should also put on the table in these municipal elections. I also have many interactions with new arrivals in Canada. In the past, a lot of new arrivals from the Filipino community here in Hamilton or elsewhere are through the Federal Express entry pathway. But now the federal government has launched the Student Direct Stream. What the Student Direct Stream does is it has identified 11 countries whose people can apply for this student stream. So students can get their temporary visa and study for 2 years of graduate certificate programs. But what happens is a lot of those students who are coming here are experiencing what Hamiltonians, Canadians are experiencing, problems of affordable housing. But beyond that, whereas we as citizens and permanent residents can avail of services, a lot of the students don't have access to mental health services. The Fifth Estate, CBC's Fifth Estate, just had a segment last Thursday on how, again, this is sad news, how a funeral home in Toronto has been, I don't know what's the term, but they report that 2 to 4 international students are dying every month for the past 2 years. Because these students come here because of false promises by education recruitment agencies. And we're not talking about established universities here. A lot of private colleges have come up to serve these students who are on this pathway. So while there are coverage in the news for students, international students in Toronto and Mississauga, I haven't heard anything yet of this situation in Hamilton, and I think we have to shed light on this, and I wish someone would take this up. Sorry, it's very long, but, and then lastly, I think for migrant advocates, thank you for this platform. There's also an invitation to revisit Hamilton's commitment for our city as a sanctuary city. So I think I haven't heard much about that in this election. So I'm surprised, for example, when I read in the news that this election doesn't have a defining issue. There are many, many issues, and people here in this panel are talking about all of this.
Thank you. Mohammed, I know, one thing that we hear when we're interacting with folks are just the question of what level of government will decide different things. you work on housing. We know housing on all of the elections has come up, and affordability. And so whether you can buy a house, find an affordable place to live, have a roof over your head, there's all different entry points of what housing and safe and secure housing means to you. Can you just tell us a bit about your work and the issues that you're hearing from folks in terms of, it's one thing to be able to have a house, absolutely, and a home to live in, but also those who already have homes in Hamilton and the supports that they may need, and whether you think that should be something we need to discuss more this election.
Yeah, so that's a really big issue that's been happening in Hamilton, especially I think in the last 3 years with COVID. We've seen essentially an eviction crisis, not just a housing crisis, but an eviction crisis. People are losing their homes at a rapid rate. And a lot of municipal leaders tend to be hands off and push that back and say, well, that's a provincial problem. Which I think has been a grave mistake that we've made as a municipality. We have the ability to pour money into social care and social supports to keep people housed. A lot of the big problem that we're seeing is that our rent control protections within the province are pretty much atrocious. So keeping people housed, keeping them from being evicted is so vital to protecting what affordable rent we may have. Right now, the city has a tenant defense fund, but it's only $50,000. And once it's run out, it's run out. And it's very, very narrow in that it only helps people who are facing above guideline rent increases or rent evictions. And if you go through a litigation case that may take 1 or 2 years, that $50,000 is pretty much gone. And once it's gone, the city does not top it up. And then other than that, there isn't really any municipal supports in place to keep people housed. There's this over-reliance on the nonprofit sector. Where I work, we are funded provincially, but we're severely underfunded, and we've been defunded since 2018, but going back to the Mike Harris years. And then other than that, we're relying on religious nonprofit sectors. We have Good Shepherd's eviction program. And then Acorn, which is basically a community volunteer-run group, which they may not have the time or the expertise or even the emotional capacity to be able to take that support on. So there's not very much money being poured into that. And recently I had just said that the police was asking for a $6 million increase this year, and what we could do in terms of applying that to social care in our city. $6 million goes a really long way to keeping people housed. $6 million also allows people to even get representation at the Landlord and Tenant Board, which is facing a massive digital divide right now. These are all parts of the eviction crisis that the municipality can't have their hands on. The Landlord Tenant Board isn't even releasing stats on how many people are getting evicted on daily, but there are hundreds and hundreds of cases every single day, and I would say about 80% of them result in people losing their homes. So I think the city in itself needs to take a bigger role in ensuring people aren't losing their homes. That the story that she just said about losing your house 5 times, that doesn't happen, because that is pretty much the story. Is people get bullied out of their homes, they lose their home, there's nothing for them to turn to. At our office we have currently, we just hired 1 person, but we have 4 permanent housing lawyers and 1 intake housing lawyer to serve a city of 600,000 people. It's an impossible task that we can never keep up with, and it's built in that way, and we don't have very many municipal leaders engaging with us to say, how can we do that? I recently just spoke to someone just before we went on the panel today about how we provide public legal education, something that the city could be asking us to do within the city, but also hiring people to provide public legal information to people who might face an eviction notice or where to turn to if they're about to lose their home. Those are all things that are the nitty-gritty of the housing affordability issue that the city has pretty much been hands off for since I've been here for the last 4 years.
Thank you. Yeah. We talked a little bit about the low voter turnout and our connections to politics. I'm wondering, how can we change that? Should we be? And this election in particular, what would you say to those listening on the fence? Is this an election that matters? We've talked about a change election. We know there is going to be change. What would be your message in speaking to someone who's not quite sure? Gavin, can I start with you?
I don't know if I would have a message, but I think there's a certain type of voter that frustrates me a bit, where, and we can see them in some of the politicians, where they're like campaigning against wokeness and stuff like that. I feel there's like an Americanization of our politics that's being brought into Canada, and I see it here, and it kind of worries me. So I feel this election is kind of important to see where this city is headed towards, because I see like things like wokeness or more crime, high crime, this kind of dog whistles, which kind of worry me for long term, whatever. So I don't really have a message. I just hope people will look at what they really want and not what they're afraid of, and like kind of vote based on that, as opposed to what could happen or what you might be losing in terms of resources. That's what I hope.
I'm going to just read out. This group here is also part of a group of CBC election columnists this year, and there is one person missing here today, and we're missing them. That's Rain High, and Rain did send a message from Montreal. Rain is also a former student trustee and a political researcher, and he says, "I'm really excited about the upcoming election. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I want to say that this election is showing us what happens when progressive, Black, and racialized candidates run strong campaigns. White supremacy feels threatened and lashes out. The recent vandalism of Kojo Dempsey's bus ad by a white supremacist group, as well as racist and inaccurate tweets and articles published by the far-right groups, show us how the fight for a safer Hamilton is much needed. White candidates would do better to take a principled stand against racism that is embedded in their platforms, rather than only addressing it when Black and racialized candidates experience violence. I wish the panelists my best today, and I'm looking forward to seeing the much-needed change that this election is bringing to Hamilton." Do folks feel like there's a change coming, a much-needed change? I heard there from one person. What change might we see? Anabelle?
Change, I think, it's a process. It's not going to happen right away, or it's not, October 24 will not solve it. But at the same time, it's also foolish, I think, to say that the elections doesn't matter. I think a lot of people, from my conversations with a lot of people in my neighborhood, and even, I think last week I was invited for dinner by a neighbor, and we were discussing about why some in the neighbor have multiple lawn signs from opposing camps. And one of those in the dinner table said, well, it doesn't really matter because whoever wins is the same. So from that conversation, we realized that actually what the challenge for most voters is knowing, or how to know, which candidates align with their values and principles. And in the Filipino community, for example, like we value face saving, for example. Like when someone approaches and say, "Can I put a lawn sign?" A lot of Filipino older adults in the Filipino community would say, "Sure," but without really agreeing with that person's politics. I don't know where I'm going here, but I think what's important is, if you're asking about change, it doesn't begin and end with the election. It begins with various little acts that we are doing. Like, for example, there are sustained civic engagement is very important. YWCA Hamilton, for example, has been running this Reaching for Power series, and HCCI, the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, is running the Civic Leadership Program. So these are all you know, these are all acts that help us go towards that change. And apart from that, it's also very important that our political system and the electorate are diversified. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we should not just, it's very important that we have diversity with the political candidates, and we're seeing that now. And I'm so thrilled seeing so many, as Rain has already mentioned, so many progressive, BIPOC community leaders have stepped forward despite intimidation, despite threats from white supremacist groups, despite money issues with running a campaign. But that's one thing. Another thing is, who are the people who are voting? Who are the people who are voting? I think Kojo Damte, I think he wrote or he was interviewed, I don't recall, but he was talking about how about giving voting rights for permanent residents? Permanent residents pay taxes. They avail of services, but they cannot vote. This seems to be a very new idea, but actually it's not. All municipalities in New Zealand allow permanent residents to vote at the local level. 40 municipalities in Japan allow foreigners who are permanent residents to vote in local referendums. In Dublin, in Oslo, permanent residents can vote. So when we talk about diversity in the political system, let's think of it in two ways. The political system who are voted and the electorate voting them. So, yeah.
Thank you. I want to open it up shortly to some questions, and we have some that have already come in from online. If you have questions here in the audience, you're welcome to. There is a mic in the middle of the room. But part of this conversation was also to ask, what is the Hamilton we want to see? How do we get there? Those are big questions. We did ask folks in the lead up to this conversation online just on their thoughts on that question. And we said specifically, just to simplify it, even though you can oversimplify, how would you describe the Hamilton you want to see in 3 words? And these are some of the answers we got. Just, green, safe. Inclusive, safe, clean. Less hate-filled. No more mandates. Safe for all. And climate action now. We also received, and you'll see them at the back of the room, and for those online, if you can get to a Hamilton Library branch before the election, these postcards are at all of the branches. But we have these postcards where we asked people, if you ran this city, what would you do? We've got a lot on housing, was probably the #1 answer. That was the common thread there. But of course, there's always a diversity of answers as well. I'd love to do a quick round before we open it up to some questions just on the Hamilton you'd like to see, and if there was one thing you'd like to see changing after this election or to get to that Hamilton you want to see, what would it be? Mohammed, can I start with you?
I think I would like to see our low bar raised. I think our low bar is too low right now. And I think a lot of past incumbents don't look at it that way. And I think with the potentially new crop of municipal candidates that are coming in that I'm hopeful will win, I think they are set to raise that low bar. So I think that's what I would like to see to coming out of this election, I think. Yeah.
Sonia.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel like we're almost like operating from like a deficit mindset of like, we're basically begging for crumbs at this point, and we don't need to be. So I have like a lot of faith in folks who are coming in to those positions in council, especially, and also a lot of faith in like, especially the 18 to 30-year-old voters. Like I think there's a lot of folks with like good mindsets who are ready to vote, and hopefully that'll like make some change. But yeah, I think definitely wanting to see that bar raised, and like wanting to see the city operate within like an abundance mindset of like, we have what we need and like, let's do the things with what we have, you know?
Anabelle, what's the Hamilton you'd like to see?
I'd like a Hamilton that reflects the people who make up and who are working for it. Right now we see, repeated people who are there, although a lot of them are not seeking re-election, but because it's systemic, right? We have to look at what are the barriers that make people who are different from the mainstream. What are the barriers for them to participate fully in politics, whether as a candidate or as a member of the electorate? YWCA Hamilton has posted, I think a couple of months ago, that there is still a deficit, or there's still a lower proportion of women running for politics. So this is something that I want to see. We are in Canada. We are in, we are in a country where we have, as what Sonia is saying, we have more resources out there. What are the barriers for women to be seeking re-election, and why is it that we have the same people, like the trustees, the school board trustees, for example, we keep on getting the same the same people over and over again for decades. And so that is why I'm thrilled to see that Sabrina Dahab, Hona Mehdi, and Jay Eddington, and many others have stepped forward to run for the school board. I think we need new blood, and I think not only new blood, but people who have been working in the community. Like, let's not waste the time. Let's not waste this opportunity. We have people who have a history and track record of working with the communities, with the 99%. Let's not waste that opportunity.
Thank you. Cheyenne, what would you like to see in the city that is now your home and has been for some time? Yeah.
Yeah, something that I really saw when I moved here. I recently moved from Mississauga around last year. That I saw some of the postcards saying that a lot of French services were not available to students, and my younger siblings, like my little sister in the crowd here, they are in French immersion, and it was kind of tough to find French schools here in Hamilton. Luckily, we do reside near one, and we are lucky enough to be able to attend it. But some other people aren't so lucky. Some people, they have to travel very far near the Hamilton side just to get to a school that offers French services fully for students who just want to be bilingual. Honestly, Hamilton should work on trying to become bilingual, as Canada is, like, our two main languages are English and French, other than all the other languages that come with people that move here. We should work on finding more space for students to work on their French, whether that be in new schools, whether that be in existing schools, but having different programs available for students. Something that I would like to see is just bilingual Hamilton, and also just a better green space and more interactive community for the youth.
Thank you. Gavin.
I agree with Anabelle with her, I think, more access for diverse candidates, economically diverse as well. But I also, bike lanes, I like to be able to ride everywhere and not get dumped into traffic. So that would help. And a lot of trucks park in those bike, this is I can't stand it, sorry.
Well, I'll put this, we do have a comment to you, Gavin,
okay.
From someone who's tuned in online. And this is from Nicole Smith. Nicole says, and this is to your comment about not voting out of fear.
Yeah.
This election very much matters. Dog whistles, definitely not from fear. You have a response to that?
Dog whistles.
That's the comment. So, could you elaborate a bit on just the fear?
When they say they're worried about wokeness in schools, or they're mandates, stuff like those are part of a certain far right language, and those are dog whistles, and those people know what they're talking about. I don't understand. I'm not getting upset, anyone. Sorry, but I just don't understand the question. It doesn't make sense to me. Dog whistles out of fear.
It was a comment, I think.
When you look at people who vote based off of slogans and dog whistles, they're worried about losing their space, or it's about losing resources, it's about losing their perceived superiority in a society. So I hope, and I think that kind of language is so prominent in like social media, and we see it in the news where it's very quick, they're very soundbite. Everyone, when you say wokeness, everybody knows what that means, and it's very quick, and it's a great way to hide what you really mean. And a lot of people who don't really engage in politics except for a federal level, like I was talking about with hating Justin Trudeau, are in that kind of mindset. And I hope they can get past that fear of losing resources to see what is really going on, that we're all dealing with the same problems and you are just a pawn in a larger issue. And that hopefully that they could vote based off of real material things such as housing, such as all sorts of stuff. And that's what I mean by that. That's the dog whistle, is like, people know what, yeah, that sounds like something to me. They understand it. I mean, we know what dog whistle is.
Yeah,
right?
there was another question from online just on the steps that we can take to combat hate in the city. It's a very big question. I mean, it's multi-pronged. Any thoughts from anyone on the panel on, as a community member, or a message to those in political office as well?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Well, first I think is that there is a reluctance in the past term, there's a reluctance from certain people to understand what hate actually looks like, and as you know, Gavin has said, what those dog whistles are. And people hear them, but perhaps aren't picking up what the nuance behind that terminology is. Like, you know, we've been hearing special interest group. Really what that just means is we don't want black and brown people speaking up. You hear fear-mongering like, we don't want the opioid crisis around us, but really what they're saying is we don't want poor people around us. There's a certain sophistication that I think that is required from our candidates to hear and call out immediately and stamp it out and meet it at the exact point it's being said to show that it's not tolerated. I think that's really step one, but I think combating white supremacy, the patriarchy, colonization is a massive undertaking, but there are certain things that candidates can do, especially when you are listening to a council meeting and you see it often raised. There are certain things that must be done at the exact point to shut it down and not have a tolerance for it. We saw it a lot with, for example, Terry Whitehead. Bless his soul, he went through a lot of mental health issues, but at the same time, he was very much a person that utilized those tactics to wield it against specific groups and specific populations. But there needs to be a tolerance, a very low tolerance from other candidates, and it needs to be in unison to shut that down. And I think when you have 3 or 4 people that are unwilling to combat that language, it festers and it grows. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that why this right-wing ideology is popping up is because there's been a reluctance from people to want to challenge it at its source. They're unwilling to fight power with power, and I think so that's really step one in what we need to see in terms of our candidates right now.
Gavin.
I mean, and there's new dog whistles in a way, like Andrea Horvath was talking about to Keenan, what's his name? Lewis. Yeah, when she made the comment about you're basically not from here. It's like, I understand what she's trying to say, that you're not Hamiltonian, but that's a broad thing to say. Like you're saying that to a lot of people. That, like, my parents aren't from here, and my parents heard that stuff. And when I first moved here, and they had a problem with Confederate flags here, and I would speak up about it, people would tell me to go back to Toronto. So there's like I don't know if she's doing that on purpose, but there's a bit of a dog whistle in that to me when I hear it.
Thanks. Yeah, Anabelle.
To me, there are also, like, I agree with Mo that hatred and racism exist in different forms. And I just mentioned a while ago about international students. And I want to go back to that point where international students don't come here for free. They contribute $23 billion in the Canadian economy. And hatred can look like getting money from someone, but not providing services. To those people, you get money. They're not cash cows. And so hatred and racism can also come in that regard. Yeah, I can go in on by the way, but I will stop.
Anyone else wanted to contribute to that?
I feel like it's such a big question. Like, how do you address hate in the city? It's like, can we approach from like a place of care as like community members? I think that for me, it's like less of a focus on like the responsibility of politicians and more of a focus on our collective responsibility for each other. So like just a challenge to like each and every single person to move through community in ways that are caring. Like if you see or hear something that is like hurtful or hateful, like having the courage and the strength to be able to like address those things in good ways, you know? I'm not saying maybe like starting a fist fight out of it. I mean, all power to you, whatever you want to do. But I think that there's like ways that situations and incidents can be like de-escalated and addressed. And I think that the more we do that as community members with each other, the more safe like we'll all be and feel. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Cheyenne.
Actually, the de-escalation part, especially in the schools where you have a lot of people that are trying to chase fame in social media and trying to get, you know, just try to be popular in the school. It's when you oppose them, it's hard not to be in a huge fight. And in a way, de-escalation can help by when you escalate the situation, then what happens is once it gets escalated to a point where you would have to break up maybe in a fist fight or maybe just in a combat war between friend groups, I think de-escalation can help by, you know, just calming everyone down. And it's really hard to say that because there's a lot of people in school, they tend to just, you know, trying to be the coolest in terms of just like among everyone in the school generally. So it's hard to address hate, especially when it's subtle as well, like going in the hallways and some people call you by a name that you wouldn't like to be called. Even subtle hate like that is really hard to address, and you can't really de-escalate or escalate that situation. Is kind of how it is. So in terms of that, I think just trying to de-escalate any situation that if were to be escalated, that would probably be a great problem.
I agree with both your points. I just think what's happening is we have our political leaders, or some, who are weaponizing a certain group to get votes. And it has to stop at that end. It's not an individual problem. This is a systemic issue that needs to be dealt with at that point where our political leaders aren't trying to weaponize racism to get votes. And that will help curb what's going on, I feel. Yeah.
Well, we're coming up to the time, but I wanted to just ask one last question. Is just a week away, just over a week away to the election. How are you feeling going into that? How would you summarize your feelings towards election day? Mohammed.
Well, I feel hopeful. I only moved here 4 years ago, but I've never seen a municipality so engaged. And I don't know if maybe there's been something that's happened in the past 4 years. Even like I was thinking about 2 years ago and pre-pandemic, 3 years ago, 2019. I didn't think there was this much engagement, but like people seem to care for the issues that they care about, for better or for worse. But I think that's great that so many people want to have their voice expressed. So I'm hopeful for a very engaged Hamilton.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm feeling like excited and nervous, but also hopeful. Hoping that there'll be like a breath of fresh air kind of brought into council and brought into the city.
I agree with both of them. Yeah, I'm also hopeful and excited, but I also want to say that political participation doesn't end in the elections, and so whatever happens, the work continues for everyone.
I'm feeling also excited because it is going to be my first time voting in an election, and hopefully I will not make the same mistake and not finding it important to vote, which now I do find it very important to vote, and I've researched upon it. And, you know, and not just for myself, voting is not just for myself, it's for the community. You know, I vote for my voice to the leader of whoever is going to be elected next, but it doesn't just stop there. You know, I hope to inspire a lot of other young students to vote and find it important to vote. And that, for me, that's already exciting as well. Being an inspiration is what excites me as well. When I see people saying, oh, you motivate me, you know, that just sparks something in my heart. And I feel like being that advocate for inspiration, I feel like that's just amazing to me. And just 1 week away from elections, I'm pumped up.
Great.
I'm glad he's happy. That's great. Have young people ready to vote. I'm good. I'm lucky. I live in a ward where it's an easy choice for me. So I'm pretty happy that I'm lucky for that. I don't have to make a hard choice. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. Thanks to everyone who was watching online and is here in person at the library. We really appreciate your insights and just your experience and being able to share that with others. And I hope everyone has some fruitful conversations over the next week about the issues that matter to you. Thank you so much to the Hamilton Public Library for hosting us today and partnering with CBC Hamilton on this panel. And have a wonderful Saturday afternoon. Thanks, everybody.